are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every this is Wednesday. Think about it for a minute. I'm here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about job hunting, starting and running a business, and building wealth, the whole financial side of our lives. So today I'm going to be talking about the psychology of holding cash. And I think this is particularly apt because we're going through a period of uncertainty, a lot of geopolitical events going on. There's been a significant change in how the federal government approaches economic policy, and it's during times of uncertainty that I think people most often think or start thinking, gosh, how should I invest? What should I invest? All that kind of stuff. So I have a few thoughts on this subject that I thought I would share with you. And, hopefully this will give you, if not clarity, it'll give you some food for thought. And that will help you reach a decision with which you're comfortable. I will say, as a global view of investing. So I'm a big believer in what I call the sleep test. So in general, I tell people, don't invest in something if you're not going to sleep well because you're invested in it, right? So if it's the kind of thing where you have to be checking, the market every 10 minutes or every 5 minutes or continually, or if it's something that you know so little about it that you're just constantly nervous about being invested in that particular thing, whatever it is. Maybe it's some sort of, I don't know, oil and gas investment. Maybe it's real estate. Maybe it's, some sort of media project. If it makes, if you're constantly feeling anxiety and you're not sleeping well because of it, that's not an investment that you should have made or should make in the future. And then so that's kind of the basis of at least how I fundamentally look at investing. And of course then that plays into this whole psychology of holding cash, right? So I think there are psychological reasons and there are practical reasons why people hold cash. And I'm going to just talk about those. The reason I'm going like this is because, as always, I have my notes over here. I want to make sure that I convey to you all my thoughts. So I think the first sort of psychological, and there's also, I think, a practical side to this as well, is a sense of needing safety and security in their investments. So in volatile times, volatile markets, there's a fear of losing money, right? And so for many people, capital preservation, right, maintaining the funds they invested, at least not losing those monies, is one of, if not the most important thing. And of course, the older you are and the less time you have to recover from a significant investing mistake, so then the more capital preservation looms large in your investment decisions, right? But there is a practical side of that, right? Because some things just are inherently risky, and they're very hard to judge with any sense of security. So people think about something like, I don't know, Bitcoin. Oh, Bitcoin always goes up, or real estate always goes up. Those are not. That's not true. They're, even housing prices in California have declined at times. Okay, so the reason we get a return on investment is because, among other issues, there is risk in putting the money in that investment. The return we get hopefully is commensurate with the risk. Now, there are other reasons why we get a return on investment. We're tying our money up for a certain period of time, and so we don't have the use of that money. The idea of illiquidity, and the greater the illiquidity of the investment, the higher that the premium should be because of that. But the bottom line is, in general, the riskier the investment, the higher the return you should be able to expect. But that presupposes that there's a fixed term to the investment, which oftentimes there's not. And so, to put your money in something that's very risky, that doesn't have a set term, means that there may come a time when you need to pull your money out of that investment because you need it for some other reason. You have an emergency or whatever. And so you may have to pull it out at a time when the value of the investment maybe has fallen below even what you invested, right? So that's a practical side of the security and safety issue. But people have different experiences. So people who lived through the 2008 housing crash, or lived through a family bankruptcy or something like that, right? So those are sort of one is a sort of economic trauma. The other is more of an individual trauma. But those two impact our tolerance for risk and our craving for safety and security. So I think that's one aspect of it. The next is control and flexibility. So having cash means that you can respond to an emergency. You have the funds there. So, God forbid there's some sort of medical emergency or something like that. So, having cash on hand means that you can take care of it. If you have car repairs, if there's damage to your house or wherever you're living, condo, apartment, whatever it is. If you have a special event and you want to go to a wedding or a quinceañeros or something like that, so you have the money, they have the cash available if you're holding cash, and so you have the control and flexibility that allows you to respond to those emergencies or be a part of those opportunities. So many people have the mindset that, look, cash gives me options, and I like that. And so for someone like that, your cash position may be larger than someone else who, for example, might feel more perfectly comfortable. Well, look, if there's an emergency, I'll put it on my credit card, and then I've got 30 days to get the cash to pay that off. Or worst case scenario, I'll pay it off over a couple of months. Okay. Now, some people would tell you never do that. That's ridiculous to pay interest ever. Well, it depends, right? If you've got a great investment opportunity, and you're getting a fantastic return on investment, but it means that you're going to have perhaps more of your cash tied up than you might otherwise do in terms of keeping cash on hand for an emergency. Well, are you going to not make the investment? And because an emergency might happen, how are you going to feel if maybe 2 years from now, when the investment matures and you could have gotten that nice return, there'd been no emergency, right? So giving up the return on that investment in order to keep cash for an emergency may not have been the best decision, right? So in that case, paying a month or two of interest on, while you're paying off the balance or whatever, might be a perfectly acceptable thing to do. Again, it depends on your particular perspective. It depends on your overall financial situation. So control and flexibility is both a psychological and a practical issue as to whether you should hold cash. Okay. For the reasons that I just outlined. Okay, next, status and self-worth. So some people get a sense of self-worth really out of having a big bank balance, right? I was talking with one of my clients earlier this week. This is a new client, and we were going over her various bank accounts, and she has a checking account. Well, she has two checking accounts. One that's the one she uses for her checking, and the other there's just basically a big sum of money sitting there, right? And she, she's, and I did, I'm getting to know her from from the standpoint of how she likes her finances handled. And and so I had been wondering about, well, maybe she just likes to have a lot of cash on hand in order to respond to emergency or whatever. So as we were talking about things, she said, it's silly for me to have this big cash balance. It should be in something earning some kind of return. Okay, well, there you go, right? So her motivation isn't the sort of status or sense of self-worth or the control issue of having a big cash balance. It was really just kind of, inertia. She never got around to doing it. And so, this is something that we're going to take care of. So, and by the way, I don't mean a judgment on people who like the status of having a big bank balance. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's what makes you comfortable, if that's what helps you better make other decisions, perfectly fine, right? Look, it's your choice whether or not to keep those balances. And what I would do is not relevant to the decisions that you would make, right? I'm giving you some thoughts right now. Maybe my thoughts will cause you to rethink holding a big cash balance, but there's nothing inherently wrong in doing that. If you have something that's more important than squeezing out every last dime of return on the capital that you might otherwise invest. Perfectly legitimate decision. So then there's other sort of psychological aspects to liking having a large bank balance. So it gives you a feeling, it might give you a feeling of success or a feeling of freedom or independence, right? So for someone who grew up without a lot of money, the idea of having a large bank account or whatever that means in the context of that person's life, it may help them, feel like, look, I've really been able to raise myself up from my prior circumstances, and that's a great thing, right? Hopefully, we all have an opportunity to do that. So, status and self worth is a psychological reason for holding cash. Valid or invalid, I think that again, that comes down to the individual. Okay. Next is a lack of trust or understanding about how investing works. And, again, this is a common phenomenon. Unfortunately, overall, I think we have a relatively poor level of, of financial literacy in the United States. So I know when my daughter was, I think she was a freshman or sophomore in high school. She had a semester of personal finance. I mean, it was fine, but one semester in high school hardly makes us financially literate, right? And now, in my case, my mother was a certified financial planner and an accountant, not a CPA, but an accountant. And so, she knew a lot about handling money, a lot about investing. We would talk about things from time to time. Oftentimes, she worked for men who were very successful, had done a lot of investing. I know she worked for a savings and loan at one point. I don't recall the name of it, but the fellow she worked for, his name was Robert Svoboda. He was kind of legendary in Santa Barbara back in the 1970s and I think into the 1980s. And I got the opportunity to talk to him several times over the years that my mother worked, in at his company. And he always had good things to tell me, things that have helped me, in my life going forward. In fact, I think it was Bob Savota who gave me a book called The Richest Man in Babylon, one of the best books I've ever read on investing. And if you were to search through my shows, I did a show on the Richest Man in Babylon. The book has been around now for, I think, over half a century. It's an amazing book about investing. Very simple, right? And so, but a lot of people don't have those kind of opportunities. And so where does that knowledge come from? And if they don't have that knowledge, and it's hard to trust in a system. And there's so much talk today about the system being rigged in favor of large investors. So for smaller investors like us, that may mean that we just don't trust that we're going to be able to invest successfully. And so then we hold on to our cash. Now, I think the remedy there is to get ourselves educated, right? Read books, listen to podcasts, talk to friends who have done investing and learn about their experiences. Talk to people who are involved in investment advising. Okay, even if someone is, if let's say you meet someone who's in investing and advising, and you're just not, you don't have enough money to be their client, they would probably still at least talk to you a little bit, share some basic information, maybe refer you to someone that is better able to work with you at the level at which you're currently at. Okay, and that's the name of the game. And by the way, you can tell a good investment advisor because that person will take the time to help you, even if it doesn't mean that you're not going to be his client. He'll still take a few minutes to help you and see that you're at least connected to someone for whom you are potentially the right kind of client fit. Or go back to last week's episode of People Making Money, when I interviewed, oh gosh, I'm going up on his name now. Here, I have to get it for you now. Here we go. When I interviewed Michael Scarpati, who built a financial literacy website, right? It's designed specifically for the 99% of us, right? And it's only a very, very small investment, or cost to use his service, that will give you tremendous return in terms of knowledge and connecting you with people who can really help you, and people that you can trust, and your trust can grow as you continue to work together. That's really, the name of the game, so to speak. So while it can all be daunting, start out small. My first investment was some money that I got as gifts for my bar mitzvah, that I put into a savings and loan when I was a kid in Santa Barbara. I still remember they had these banks that, made ceramic banks that they would give out to kids. You would put your coins in it. It was shaped like a lantern. I loved it. I wish I still had it. I'm sure the savings and loan isn't there anymore. But, I used to put pennies and nickels and dimes, whatever it was, in it. And then every whatever, period of time, my mom or dad would take me to the savings and loan, and I put it in my savings account. I started doing that once I put my bar mitzvah money in there. And I had a little book where they recorded what my balance was. I'd look at it all the time. Back then we're probably talking like $10, $15, which may not sound like a whole lot, but I was 13 years old. It was very cool to me, right? So there's ways to start out, opening up what used to be called a passbook account, or a savings account, or a money market account nowadays. Very safe way to invest, and just get you going, kind of get your hand, in the game, so to speak. And then you can learn more and gain greater trust in your ability to make sound investment decisions, and not feel like you necessarily need to hold cash because you don't trust or understand how investing in the markets work. And then finally, you may have a short-term goal. So maybe you're, saving up for a car, or maybe you're saving up the down payment for a house, or to take a vacation, or tuition to go to school, right? So while it may seem like, I'm just going to hold this money in cash, that's the smart decision. But depending how far away that particular purchase is, it may not make sense to hold cash, even though it seems like it. So you may be better to put it in a money market, and at least get a few percent return. And even if it's only going to be 6 months, look, that's better than, as I used to say, a jab in the eye with a pointed stick. So whether you hold cash or not to pursue a short-term goal, it depends just how short-term it is. If the goal is next month, okay, fine. So yeah, you're probably going to want it in cash. If the goal is 6 months or 9 months or 12 months down the road, so then holding cash may not make sense. However, psychologically, it seems like, it's not worth the effort to put the cash anywhere, because 6, 9, 12 months from now, I'm going to need it anyway. These days, because so much banking and investing is done online, so it can take just a few minutes to put the money into a money market or some other vehicle where you can get some kind of return, rather than holding it strictly as cash. Okay, so I think those are some of the psychological slash practical reasons why people hold cash. So let's take a break, and when we come back, talk about some whys and why nots of holding cash. When life brings unexpected changes, managing inherited property shouldn't add to your stress. Magnum Properties specializes in probate and trust real estate management. We handle the complexities while you focus on what matters most. From property maintenance to tenant relations, from legal compliance to maximizing value, we're your trusted partner through every step. Magnum Properties, Inc., turning property challenges into peace of mind. Call us today at 213-264-4396 or visit magnumprops.com. So this is People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel. We're talking about the psychology and also kind of the practical side of holding cash. So before the break, I talked about some of the reasons, psychological and practical, that people do hold cash. So now I want to talk about when it makes sense to hold cash, and when it doesn't make sense. Okay, and then this is going to relate to some of the issues that I was talking about. So when should you hold cash? Well, in general, it's good to have a fully funded emergency fund. Now, you'll see different recommendations on this, anywhere from a 3 to 6 month margin. I think a lot of that depends on what your situation is. If you're married, if you have children, if you're the sole provider for your family, you may want to have a larger emergency fund, because you don't have, for example, a spouse who's working, who can take on, or who's already taking on part of the financial well-being of your family. Okay, so on the other hand, if you're single, you have few, if any, obligations. So I don't know, and you're young, you're in good health, so maybe 2 months is enough, right? But in any event, it is a good idea to have some cash on hand for emergencies, where you're injured and you can't work for a short time, or like I said in the beginning of the show, there's your car gets damaged, and it's insurance doesn't cover it, or your house gets damaged, and again, insurance doesn't cover it. These kind of things. So it's good to have a fully funded emergency fund. How much of that should be held in cash? So that'll depend on your circumstances. Okay. If you're saving for a major purchase, and as I was saying right before the break, and that purchase is coming up in, you know, 1, 2, maybe 3 months. So then, it may not be worth the hassle of setting up a kind of an investment account, especially if, let's say you're saving up for a vacation, and the vacation is going to cost $5,000. Okay, so I mean, yeah, you could put it in a money market. Maybe over a 12-month period, you might make on $5,000, $20 or something like that. Is it really worth your time to, go and, open a money market and put the money in and all that kind of stuff? Maybe not. On the other hand, if your major purchase is farther down the road, like I said, 6, 9, 12 months or more, okay, so then it makes sense not to hold the money in cash. Minimally, at least put it in a money market. Okay. Now, some people say, well, a money market is cash. Well, yes, but it's not a checking account, although there are check writing, features on money markets. But when I say cash, I mean holding money, without any kind of return on it. Okay. So, if and the other thing is, while we may anticipate reaching a goal in, let's say, 6 months, things happen, and sometimes we're not able to reach the goal in 6 months. It's going to take us another 3 months. We would have been better off putting the money somewhere where we can make a return. So, especially if you have a little bit of flexibility as to when you actually execute on your goal, right? So let's say your goal, you have a 6-month goal to go on a very nice vacation. You're going to be saving up $25,000 to go on this vacation. And you want to go during the summertime. Well, there's 3 months in the summertime. So, if you're starting in January, maybe you'll put it in some kind of investment that has a 6-month term. Okay. And so, the money will be available to you January, March, April, May, June. So, sometime, very early July, with the 6 months will be up, and that'll be fine. You can go on vacation later in July or August, something like that. And that way you're getting the benefit of making a somewhat of a term investment, which should give you a little bit better return on your investment. And if for some reason it turns out you can't go on the vacation, well, so then, it's doubly better that you've put your money into some kind of term investment, because otherwise, now let's say it's going to be another 6 months or another year before you can go, because you're going to go the following summer. Okay, great. So you'll, at least you didn't lose holding the money for the initial 6 months. Okay. So, if a major purchase is imminent, then you may want to hold it in cash. Otherwise, probably better to not hold it in cash. Okay. If you are looking, if you have your own business, okay, and you need to have flexibility to be able to take care of opportunities in your business. So, I was not talking, but I was communicating with someone who buys and sells equipment and machinery. She was telling me about her business, and she most people who do that, and this is what made me think of it, is most people who do that, they keep kind of a pile of cash on hand, because if a particularly good opportunity comes along to buy something at a particularly favorable price on their own account, people do that. People in that business do that. They'll buy it, and then they'll turn around and sell it and make a larger profit than if they just brokered it to someone else. Okay. And there's lots of businesses like that, where there's an opportunity to act as a broker on the one hand and as a principal on the other. And so in that case, you may keep a fairly significant amount of cash in your business in order to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. And any return that you would give up because the money's not, in some sort of term investment, it doesn't matter, because the return you're going to make on an opportunistic basis is so large that it dwarfs what you might otherwise have given up. Okay, and there are people, real estate investors, who keep a significant amount of money in cash, and that's for the same reason, because they're opportunistic and they want to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. Okay, and then finally, and I mentioned this also before the break, as you get closer to retirement, so while you won't necessarily hold your money literally in cash, the types of investments in which that you make are probably going to be different in terms of their level of security of capital preservation than they would be when you were younger. Okay, so these are some thoughts about when holding cash makes sense. Now, when should you not hold cash, right? And, and I've got several thoughts on that. So first of all, it's generally speaking, if you're holding on to cash because you're afraid, or because you're afraid, so really the issue there is to work through your fear. What are you afraid of? Why? Okay. If it's lack of knowledge, that can be worked out. If it's trauma from a prior financial situation that worked out badly, that can be worked through as well. Okay. So most of the things we fear, it's not that the fear is irrational. Some people would say that. I do not. Fear is oftentimes very rational. However, fear will sometimes cause us to act in a way that's not in our best interests. So rather than letting ourselves be controlled by fear, the idea is to work it through, and that way we can have a larger range of options that may put us in a position to do something better for ourselves. Okay. Now, fear is different than indecision. Okay. So sometimes indecision is not a reason to hold on to cash. Okay. And oftentimes, indecision is the cloak that's been put over fear. And so we've got to look through that indecision to really understand what's causing the indecision. Is the indecision being caused by volatility in the economy, volatility in, let's say, the stock market, or volatility, as strange as this may sound, volatility in real estate? Real estate can go through periods of volatility, okay? Or whatever other investing sector you can think of. So if your indecision is because of volatility, for example, so that's a prudent indecision, right? Because the nature of volatility is it's very hard to make a decision because things are changing all the time. Okay. So if you're indecisive for a good reason, so then hang on to your cash. That may very well be the best decision. On the other hand, if you can't put a good if there's not a good reason underpinning your indecision, that's a sign that you probably need to work through that, just like you would fear, and get beyond it so that you can go on to make prudent investment decisions. Okay, so fear and indecision, they may be working together. They may need to be dealt with in a similar way. Okay, but each needs to be examined on its own to figure out what you need to do to work them through. Okay, but in general, if fear and indecision is causing you to hold on to your cash, that's probably not, or I shouldn't say probably, it may very well not be the best decision, and it's time to work through it. Okay. When holding on, so if you're in a high inflationary period, like we were back, what was it, 2021, 22, when inflation went as high as 9%, right? To hold on to cash in a high inflationary environment means your money is literally losing purchasing power. Okay. So while, money markets weren't keeping pace with inflation, their rates did go up to 4 or 5%. So at least you weren't losing all the ground, right? You were still losing some ground. That's the nature of inflation. But as inflation keeps up, generally speaking, it's a bad policy to hang on to cash, because that cash is losing value as inflation creeps up, and as the inflationary period gets longer and longer. Okay. So there's a lot of talk about inflation now. The kind of inflation that we're talking about right now, this is not a high inflationary period, right? We're talking about inflation in the 2 to 3% area. Okay, by any historical measure, that's not inflationary. Okay, it may be higher than what the Federal Reserve wants to see, or whatever. That okay, those fine, but we're not in a high inflationary period. On the other hand, we are in a period where we can oftentimes make pretty sound investments that will keep pace with or even beat inflation by at least a little bit, right? And so there's no reason to hang on to cash in this environment, um, you know, due to anything related to inflation. Okay. All right. Um, it also doesn't make sense to hold on to cash and not take advantage of compounded growth, right? So, in terms of a long term investing strategy, okay, the best thing to do is to invest early and regularly in whatever your overall investment plan is, because while in the very early time the growth due to a return on investment is relatively small, that growth compounds. So going from year to year, and 5 year to 5 year, and 10 year to 10 year, looking at it over those longer time horizons. So what starts happening is you start earning interest on your interest. That's what compound interest means. Okay. But even if you're not getting an interest paying investment, maybe you own some equities, some stocks, and they're paying dividends. I know when I was younger, still do to this day, I always made it a point to just reinvest my dividends to buy more stock. The dividends were small anyway, a few dollars here or there. I remember when I was in high school, I won a scholarship that was sponsored by a company at the time known as Southern California Edison, one of the big private utilities here in California. And for being a finalist, I got one share of stock. And then for winning one of, I think it was 5 scholarships, I got a second share of stock. So I had 2 shares of stock when I was, I believe, 17 years old was when this happened. Okay. And from the beginning, I reinvested my dividends in buying more Southern California Edison stock. 40 years later, okay, that stock had grown to, I think, 50 shares, right? So it had gone up by 25 times. Now, it wasn't due solely to dividends. There was a stock split at one point, but by just letting the investment compound over a long period of time, the stock, when I got it, I think was worth, I want to say, around $20. And when I finally sold it about 40 years later, it was worth close to $1,000. That's the power of compounding. Okay. So, rather than let your money sit in cash, take advantage of the compounding growth that investing provides to you. Okay. And finally, holding cash without a clear strategy, without a clear need for holding the cash, like those that I mentioned a little while ago, that does not make sense. Okay. So you may be holding higher than whatever typical is cash balances, because you want a feeling of security, you want to have that sense of self-worth. Okay, fine. That's an actual, there's a purpose behind that. Okay. The question is, how much cash are you going to hold in order to satisfy the purpose of those psychological needs, right? And so that's where having both a purpose and a strategy is important. Okay. So don't let one conquer the other. It's from my perspective perfectly fine to hold on to cash for psychological reasons. We are emotional human beings, right? And so psychology is important to us. But we don't want to do it willy nilly. We want to have a strategy behind that. Nor should we develop a strategy that does not take into account our emotional our emotional position, right? Like I said, that's where the sleep factor comes in. Okay, so to hold cash without a clear purpose or strategy, ill-advised. Okay, but it's relatively easy to cure. Figure out your purpose, figure out your strategy. Okay, and then you'll be able to start investing your cash with confidence. So those are my thoughts for today. As always, would be very interested to hear yours. All my social media links will be in the show when it posts on YouTube. Happy to hear from you. If you like the show, do me a favor, and if you know someone who you think would benefit from it, do me a favor and suggest it to them. I'd love to have an opportunity to gain them as a viewer and even a subscriber. And by the way, if you are a viewer and you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, I haven't mentioned this in a long time, but I would, I'd be very honored if you would subscribe to the Way to Wow shows. So thank you so much for joining me, especially my live viewers. Tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific time is my show Jiggers' Place. We're going to have a cocktail and a schmooze as we head toward the end of the week. And then next week, Monday, these are all Pacific time. Monday at 10 a.m. is my show Trust and Estates Weekly. Tuesday at 10 a.m. is my show Business Lessons from the Military. And then a week from today, I'll be back with the next edition of People Making Money. So thanks again for joining me. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day. And signing off as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my belle.